Good evening, all. I've researched hundreds of horror stories, but these 5 from New Jersey are different. They're not legends. They're not folklore. They're documented, verified, real. And in most cases, the people responsible were never caught. This is what actually happened. And if you liked the video, subscribe. And if you want more true horror stories like these, drop a comment with which case disturbed you most. I read every single one. I stand in front of 657 Boulevard now and then. I don't know why I do it. Maybe I'm hoping to see something that will make sense of what happened. But the house looks normal. It always does. We bought it in June of 2014. My wife Maria and I had been looking for months. 3 kids, good schools, safe neighborhood. Westfield checked every box. When we saw the Victorian on Boulevard, we knew it was the one, 1,900 square feet. Big yard, walking distance to downtown. The kind of place where you could imagine your kids growing up, riding bikes on the sidewalk, walking to get ice cream on summer evenings. We closed for just over $1.3 million. It felt like a lot of money, but we'd been saving for years. This was it. The house we'd retire in. The house our grandkids would visit. The previous owners seemed nice enough during the walkthrough. They lived there for 23 years. To raise their kids there. The wife showed us around, pointing out where they'd updated things, where the kids used to play. I remember thinking that was a good sign. Stability. The kind of place people stayed because they loved it. They were friendly during closing too. Shook our hands, wished us well. Said they'd missed the house but were excited to downsize. Everything felt normal, easy. The first letter came 4 days after we closed. I'd gone over to check on the renovation crew. We weren't moving in yet. Wanted to update some things first. New paint, refinish the floors, update the kitchen. Standard stuff. I pulled up around 2 in the afternoon and walked to the mailbox. A few pieces of junk mail and 1 envelope. No stamp. Just our names handwritten on the front in careful, deliberate script. I opened it standing in the driveway. Dearest new neighbor at 657 Boulevard, it started. Allow me to welcome you to the neighborhood. I skimmed it at first. The phrasing was weird, sort of old-fashioned, formal. I figured it was from an elderly neighbor trying to be friendly in that overly polite way some older people are. It mentioned the house had been the subject of my family for decades. I thought that was a strange way to put it, but I folded it up and stuck it in my pocket. I had contractors waiting inside. Maria read it that night after the kids went to bed. She looked at me halfway through and said, "This is weird." I read it again, slower this time. The letter said the writer's grandfather had watched the house in the 1920s. Their father had watched in the 1960s. Now it was their turn. It asked if we'd found what is in the walls yet. It mentioned our children specifically. It called them young blood. That phrase stuck out. Young blood. I told Maria it was probably some bored person trying to be creepy. A prank. We'd just bought a big house in a wealthy town. Maybe someone thought it was funny to mess with the new people. She wasn't convinced, but we had 100 other things to think about. Paint samples, floor stain options, contractor schedules. We kept going with the renovations. The second letter came in June, 3 weeks after the first. This one was longer, more detailed, and it was clear this wasn't a prank. The writer mentioned that we'd been doing work on the house. They knew about the renovations. They knew what kind of cars we drove, a detail we hadn't shared with anyone in the neighborhood yet. They asked which bedrooms the children would sleep in. Then they said something that made my hands go cold. I am pleased to know your names and the names now of the young blood you have brought to me. We hadn't told anyone the kids' names. We hadn't even moved in yet, but this person knew. Maria wanted to call the police immediately. I did too, but part of me felt stupid. We hadn't been threatened. Not directly. There was no "I'm going to hurt you" or anything like that. It was just letters. Creepy, unsettling letters, but still. What were the police going to do about someone sending weird mail? We called anyway. They took a report. The officer who came out was polite, professional. He read the letters, made notes, said they'd look into it. I could tell he didn't think it was urgent. Maybe he thought we were overreacting. Rich people in a big house worried about nothing. But I kept thinking about that phrase, brought to me. Not brought to the house. To me. Work on the house continued. We were almost done. The floors looked beautiful. The kitchen was nearly finished. We'd picked out furniture, planned where everything would go. We were supposed to move in by the end of July. The third letter came on a Tuesday morning in late June. I found it when I stopped by before work. I was wearing a suit, had a meeting at 9, just wanted to check on the progress. The envelope was in the mailbox. Same handwriting. I opened it in my car. This one was different, angrier. The tone had shifted. It asked why we'd hired workers to do the updates. It said we were making the house cry. It called the renovations a desecration. And then it asked about the children again. Have they found out what is in the walls? In time they will. I need to know their names. I want to know their names. Once I know their names, I will call to them and draw them to me. I sat in the car for maybe 15 minutes, just staring at the paper. The handwriting was the same, careful, deliberate, but the words felt more urgent, more personal. I will call to them and draw them to me. I drove home, told Maria we needed to talk. We sat at the kitchen table in our rental and spread out all 3 letters, read them again, back to back. She looked at me and said, "We can't bring the kids there." I wanted to argue. We'd spent so much money, put so much time into this. But she was right. I knew she was right. We hired a private investigator. Cost us another few thousand, but we needed answers. He looked into the previous owners, neighbors, anyone with a connection to the house. Came up empty. Whoever was writing the letters was careful. No fingerprints, no DNA we could use. Just handwritten envelopes left in the mailbox when no one was looking. We went back to the police. This time, they took it more seriously. The Union County Prosecutor's Office got involved. They tested the letters for DNA. They found some skin cells, maybe from saliva on the envelope seal. But it didn't match anyone in the system. The lab suggested it might be a woman based on the genetic markers, but they couldn't be sure. And even if they were right, that didn't narrow it down much. The detective assigned to the case was thorough. He interviewed neighbors up and down Boulevard. No one had seen anything. No one had received similar letters. It was just us. He asked if we'd had any disputes during the purchase, any issues with inspections or contractors, anything that might make someone angry. We hadn't. The sale was clean. The previous owners were cooperative, even friendly. But I kept thinking about something. The previous owners had lived there for 23 years. The letters said the writer's grandfather watched the house in the 1920s, their father in the 1960s. If that was true, then this person, or their family, had been watching the house for almost a century. Had the previous owners gotten letters too? Had they just never mentioned it? I called them, left a voicemail. They didn't call back. I tried again a week later. This time the husband answered. I explained what was happening. Asked if they'd ever received anything similar. There was a long pause. Then he said, "No, nothing like that." But something in his voice didn't sound right. He got off the phone quickly. Said he was sorry, but he couldn't help. Maria and I made the decision in early July. We weren't moving in. I know how that sounds. We'd spent over $1 million. We'd put months of work into renovations, but we both knew we couldn't bring the kids there. Not with someone watching, not with someone who knew their schedules, their names, who'd been studying the house for God knows how long. We talked to a lawyer, tried to figure out our options. Legally, we owned the house. We could try to sell, but we'd have to disclose what happened. That would tank the value. We put it on the market anyway, listed it in August. The showings were brutal. People would tour the house, ask questions, and then we'd have to tell them about the letters, about the police investigation, about why we'd never moved in. Most people left immediately. Some were polite about it, said they'd think it over, then never called back. Others were blunt. We're not buying the house with the stalker. We dropped the price, then dropped it again. Months went by, no offers. The letters stopped after the third one. I don't know why. Maybe because we didn't move in. Maybe because the police were involved. Or maybe because the person got what they wanted, us gone. But that almost made it worse. If they were still writing, at least we'd have more evidence, more chances to catch them. The silence felt like they were just waiting, watching. I drove by the house every few weeks. I don't know why I did it. Maybe I hoped I'd see someone. Maybe I just needed to remind myself it was real. The house sat empty. The lawn got long. We had to hire someone to mow it, keep it presentable for showings. Every month felt like we were hemorrhaging money. Mortgage payments on a house we'd never live in, rent on the place we were actually staying, contractor bills we were still paying off. It wasn't until 2019 that we finally sold it. Almost 5 years. We dropped the price to $959. Lost nearly $400,000 when you factor in everything we put into it. The new owners seemed nice. Younger couple, 2 kids. I wanted to warn them more than I did. I wanted to say, "Are you sure? Do you understand what happened here?" But legally, we'd disclosed everything. They knew, and maybe they didn't care. Or maybe they thought it was a one-time thing. Something that wouldn't happen to them. I still drive past it sometimes. I'll be in Westfield for work or passing through, and I'll take Boulevard just to see it. The house looks good. The new owners take care of it. The lawn is neat. There are toys in the yard sometimes, bikes on the sidewalk. I've never reached out to them. I don't know what I'd say. "Hey, is anyone sending you creepy letters about your kids?" They'd think I was insane. But I think about the letters all the time. I think about that line. My grandfather watched the house in the 1920s, and my father watched in the 1960s. It is now my time. If that's true, then whoever wrote those letters didn't just start in 2014. They've been watching that house for almost a century. And the thing is, we were only the second family to own it in 23 years. So who were they watching before us? What did they see? The police file is still open. I check in every couple of years. Call the detective, ask if there's been anything new. There never is. No new leads, no new suspects. The case just sits there, unresolved. Maria and I don't talk about it much anymore. The kids don't really remember. They were so young when it happened. We moved on. Found another house, smaller, in a different town. It's fine, it's safe, but it's not 657 Boulevard. I still have the letters. I kept copies, locked in a drawer in my office. I don't look at them. I don't need to. I remember every line. And sometimes, late at night when the house is quiet, I think about the question the writer asked in the second letter. Have they found what is in the walls yet? We never did find out what that meant. The house was old, sure, built in the 1920s. But the inspections didn't turn up anything strange. No hidden rooms. No old letters or artifacts. Nothing. But that question bothers me more than the threats, because it implies there was something to find, something the writer knew about, something they were waiting for us to discover. I wonder if the new owners ever found it. I wonder if they're getting letters too. I wonder if whoever's watching is still there, standing somewhere on Boulevard, looking at the house the way I do sometimes, waiting for the next family, the next generation of young blood. The file is still open, but I don't think they'll ever find who did it, and part of me thinks that's because they don't want to be found. They just want to watch. I used to walk past the house on my way to school. Everyone in Westfield knew it. The big Victorian on Breeze Knoll Drive with the tall windows and the wraparound porch, 18 rooms, 3 stories. The kind of place that made you think old money, stability, the American dream. John List lived there with his family. I didn't know them well, but I'd see them around town. He taught Sunday school at Redeemer Lutheran Church, always wore a suit, even on weekends. His kids went to the local schools. Normal family, quiet. The kind of people you don't think about much because there's nothing to think about. That was November 1971. I was 14. I remember the morning of November 9th because it was a Tuesday and I had a math test. Cold outside, but not freezing yet. The kind of morning where your breath fogs up and you walk faster to stay warm. I passed the List house like I always did. Didn't think anything of it. John List woke up that morning and made breakfast. I know this because of what the police found later. He made coffee, ate toast, went through his normal routine. Then he drove his kids to school. Patricia was 16. John Jr. was 15. Frederick was 13. He drove them to school and came back home. His wife Helen was in the kitchen drinking coffee. He walked up behind her and shot her in the back of the head. One shot, a 9mm handgun. She died immediately, slumped over the table. Then he went upstairs. His mother, Alma, was 84. She lived in the upstairs apartment they'd converted for her. She probably heard the gunshot. Maybe she called down to see what happened. He shot her above the left eye. She fell in the hallway outside her room. Then he had lunch. I've thought about that detail a lot over the years. He killed his wife, killed his mother. And then he went to the kitchen and made himself lunch, sat down and ate while their bodies cooled in the other rooms. After lunch, he went to the bank. He had things to take care of, bills to check, accounts to close. He was methodical about it, everything in order. Then he drove home and waited. Patricia got home first. Around 3:30, like always. She came in through the back door, probably calling out to see if anyone was home. He shot her in the back of the head, same as her mother. She died in the hallway. Frederick came home about an hour later. He went inside, maybe saw his sister, maybe didn't. John shot him the same way, back of the head. The boy dropped in the kitchen doorway. Then John got back in his car and drove to the high school. There was a soccer game that afternoon. John Jr. was playing. His father stood on the sideline and watched. Cheered when his son scored, clapped with the other parents. Normal, appropriate. After the game, he gave his son a ride home. They walked into the house together. John Jr. probably noticed something was wrong immediately. Maybe he saw the blood. Maybe he just sensed it. He tried to run. His father shot him multiple times in the chest. The boy fell in the ballroom. John dragged the bodies of his wife and 3 children into the ballroom and laid them out on sleeping bags. Positioned them carefully, side by side. Helen, Patricia, Frederick, John Jr. He couldn't move his mother. She was too heavy, and the stairs were too narrow. He left her where she fell. Then he sat down and wrote a letter to his pastor. 5 pages, careful handwriting. He explained everything. He said he'd lost his job, said the family was going into debt, said he couldn't bear to see them suffer through poverty. But more than that, he said he was saving their souls. Helen had been drifting from the church. The kids were becoming worldly. He was afraid they'd lose their faith, lose their salvation. By killing them now, while they were still innocent, he was guaranteeing they'd go to heaven. He wrote that he knew it was a sin, that he'd burn in hell for it, but he believed it was worth it to save them. I think about that logic sometimes, the twisted arithmetic of it. Damn yourself to save your family. Murder as an act of love. After he finished the letter, he made careful preparations. He called the school and said the kids would be absent for a few weeks. Said there was a family emergency out of state. He stopped the newspaper delivery. He set the lights on timers so it would look like someone was home. And he put classical music on the intercom system, set to play on a loop throughout the house. Then he left, drove to the airport, got on a plane, started a new life under a fake name. The bodies weren't discovered until December 7th, nearly a month later. I remember when people started asking questions. The List family had disappeared. No one had seen them. The house was lit up every night, music playing, but no one answered the door. Neighbors called the police for a welfare check. When the officers went inside, they found them. Helen and the 3 kids laid out in the ballroom like something staged, almost still in the upstairs hallway. The house had been heated the whole time, windows closed. The smell was overwhelming. The bodies had decomposed badly, but they were still recognizable. The music was still playing, classical pieces on a loop, echoing through that enormous empty house. I didn't know all the details at first. No one did. But word spread fast in a town like Westfield. 5 people murdered. The father missing. Everyone had theories. Some people thought it was a home invasion, that John was dead somewhere too. But when the police found the letter, the truth came out. John List had killed his entire family and vanished. The investigation was massive. FBI got involved. They searched everywhere, checked airports, bus stations, hotels, put out alerts across the country, but he was gone, just disappeared. Months passed, then years. The case went cold. The house stayed empty for a while. No one wanted to buy it. Eventually, the bank foreclosed, and it sold at auction. The new owners tore it down, couldn't sell it otherwise. Too much history, too much death. They built something else on the lot, something modern and anonymous. But people remembered. You don't forget something like that. I graduated high school, went to college, started a career, got married. I had kids of my own. All the while, John List was out there somewhere, living under a fake name, pretending to be someone else. He'd moved to Denver, changed his name to Robert Clark, got a job as an accountant, remarried, went to church every Sunday, became active in his new community. No one suspected anything. He was just Bob Clark, quiet accountant, devout Lutheran, regular guy. He lived that way for 18 years. In 1989, America's Most Wanted aired a segment on the List family murders. They worked with a forensic sculptor to create an age progression bust, showing what John List might look like now. They showed it on TV, asked viewers to call in with tips. Someone who knew Bob Clark saw it. They thought the resemblance was striking. They called the hotline. The FBI followed up, checked fingerprints, confirmed it was him. On June 1st, 1989, they arrested Robert Clark at his office in Richmond, Virginia. He was 64 years old. He'd been living a normal life for nearly 2 decades while 5 bodies rotted in a ballroom in New Jersey. The trial was in 1990. I followed it in the newspapers. By then, I was living out of state, but I still felt connected to it. I'd walked past that house. I'd seen those kids around town. John List showed no emotion during most of the trial, sat quietly, hands folded, while prosecutors described what he'd done. The only time he seemed affected was when they talked about his mother. He cried a little then, not for his wife, not for his children, for his mother. His defense argued he'd had a mental breakdown, that the stress of unemployment and debt had caused a psychotic break. But the prosecution had his letter, 5 pages of calm, methodical reasoning. He knew what he was doing. He'd planned it carefully. He wasn't insane. He was just convinced he was right. The jury convicted him on 5 counts of first-degree murder. He was sentenced to 5 consecutive life terms. No possibility of parole. I thought about writing to him once. I don't know what I would have said. Maybe just asked him if he thought about them. If he remembered shooting his son after cheering for him at a soccer game. If he heard the music sometimes, playing in his head. I never sent the letter. John List died in prison in 2008. He was 82. In interviews before his death, he said he'd become a born-again Christian. Said he'd asked God for forgiveness. Said he believed he'd see his family again in heaven. I think about that sometimes. The confidence it takes to believe that. To think you can murder 5 people, your own family, and still walk through the gates of heaven because you asked nicely. But what bothers me more is the time between. Those 18 years when he was just Bob Clark. Getting up, going to work, attending church, living a normal life. Did he think about them? Did he see their faces when he closed his eyes? Or had he convinced himself so thoroughly that he'd done the right thing that he slept fine? I drive through Westfield sometimes, not often, but occasionally for work or to visit old friends. The house isn't there anymore. Just a different structure on the same lot, but I know where it was. I can picture the old Victorian with the tall windows and the wraparound porch. I imagine the ballroom on that December day in 1971, the police walking in, the smell hitting them, the music still playing. 4 bodies laid out carefully on sleeping bags. A mother and her 3 children, positioned like they were sleeping, like they might wake up any moment and ask what happened. The classical music echoing through empty rooms. I have kids of my own now, 3 of them coincidentally. Sometimes, when they're all home and the house is loud with their noise and their lives, I think about Helen List. I think about what her last thought might have been, sitting at her kitchen table with her coffee before everything went dark. I think about Patricia and Frederick coming home from school on a regular Tuesday, homework in their bags, Maybe plans to meet friends later. Walking into their house and dying in the hallway. I think about John Jr. getting in the car with his father after the game, proud of how he'd played, maybe talking about it on the drive home, not knowing he had minutes left. The thing that stays with me most is the waiting. After John killed Helen and Alma, he had hours before the kids came home. He ate lunch, he went to the bank. He just waited for them, knowing what he was going to do. That's not a moment of madness. That's not a breakdown. That's something else. John List believed he was saving his family. He believed he was doing the right thing. And maybe that's the most disturbing part. Not that someone could kill their entire family, but that they could do it calmly, methodically, while genuinely believing it was an act of love. The house is gone. John List is dead. The case is closed. But I still think about it. I think about the music playing through empty rooms for a month. I think about 5 bodies decomposing while timers turn lights on and off, creating the illusion of life. And I think about how easy it is for someone to disappear, to become someone else, to live a normal life while carrying something like that inside them. 18 years. He got 18 years of freedom while his family was in the ground. Sometimes I wonder if that was part of the punishment he thought he deserved, living with what he'd done. Waking up every day and remembering, but then I remember the interviews, the calm way he spoke about it, the certainty that he'd done the right thing, and I think maybe he didn't feel punished at all. Maybe he slept just fine. I was 17 when I found her. That's old enough to understand what death looks like, but young enough that it changes you in ways you don't realize until years later. It was December 26, 1907, the day after Christmas. I worked as a boatman on the Passaic River near Harrison, New Jersey. Mostly I ferried people across, helped with cargo, did odd jobs around the docks. Winter was slow season, but I still checked the waterways every few days. Kept an eye on things. That morning was cold, the kind of cold that makes your fingers ache even inside gloves. I'd walked out to Lamp Black Swamp around 8 o'clock, hoping to find some ice thick enough for skating. The swamp was a murky stretch of water off the main river, surrounded by factories and warehouses. Not pretty, but it froze solid most winters, and kids liked to skate there. The sun was just getting high enough to see clearly. Everything had that gray winter light that makes the world look washed out. I was walking along the edge, testing the ice with a stick, when I saw them, 2 feet, bare. Sticking up out of the water, I stopped. Stared at them for maybe 10 seconds, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. They were pale, almost blue. Toes pointed up toward the sky. The rest of the body was submerged in the dark, muddy water. I've tried to describe that moment to people over the years. The way your brain refuses to accept what you're seeing. How you stand there thinking, that can't be what it looks like. But you know. Somewhere deep down, you know. I ran to get help, found a police officer on duty about 3 blocks away. He came back with me, took one look, and called for more men. Within an hour, there were a dozen people standing around the swamp. Police, factory workers, people from the neighborhood who'd heard something was happening. They pulled her out around 10 o'clock. She was young, maybe mid-20s, completely naked. Her skin was covered in mud and ash, like she'd been dragged through something before being thrown in the water. Her dark hair was matted with debris. When they laid her on the bank, water streamed off her body, mixing with the mud. I turned away, stood with my back to the scene. Someone, I don't remember who, told me I should go home, but I didn't. I stayed. I felt like I had to, like finding her meant I was responsible somehow. The police covered her body with a canvas tarp and waited for the coroner. People stood around in clusters, speaking in low voices. Someone said she'd probably been there all night. Someone else said it looked like murder. The newspapers called it the Christmas Swamp Murder. It was front-page news for weeks. The autopsy happened that afternoon. I didn't see it, but I heard the details later. Everyone did. The whole city was talking about it. She'd been struck in the back of the head with something heavy. Blunt force trauma. The blow had fractured her skull and ruptured a cerebral artery. The medical examiner found something else too, bite marks on her tongue, her own bite marks. She'd been speaking or crying out when she was hit. The impact had caused her jaw to snap shut. But here's what stayed with me, what I still think about. She didn't die from the head wound. Not immediately. She was unconscious when she went into the water. The killer had stripped her, dragged her through mud and cinder and ash, probably behind the factories where they dumped waste, and thrown her into the swamp. The cold water brought her back to consciousness, just enough to realize what was happening, just enough to know she was dying. She drowned. The medical examiner was certain. She was too weak to struggle, too injured to save herself, but conscious enough to feel the water filling her lungs. That detail haunts me more than anything else. Those few seconds of awareness, the cold, the darkness, the water. The police investigation started immediately. They tried to identify her, but she'd been stripped of everything. No clothes, no jewelry, nothing. They published descriptions in the newspapers: height, weight, hair color. Asked if anyone recognized her or knew of missing women. Days passed. Then a week. Then 2 weeks. No one came forward. They theorized she might have been a worker from one of the factories. Harrison was industrial back then. Factories everywhere, lots of immigrant workers who kept to themselves. Maybe she was new to the area. Maybe she didn't have family nearby to report her missing. Or maybe someone knew exactly who she was and said nothing. The police questioned everyone who worked near the swamp. Factory owners, night watchmen, dock workers like me. Did you see anything? Hear anything? Notice anyone acting strange on Christmas night? No one had. Or no one admitted it. The killer had been careful. The location was isolated enough that you could drag a body there without being seen, especially at night. The swamp was surrounded by industrial buildings that emptied out after dark. No houses nearby, no street lamps. They dragged the swamp looking for evidence. Found some scraps of cloth, a few buttons, one shoe. Nothing conclusive. Nothing that led anywhere. The case consumed the newspapers through January. Reporters speculated about who she might have been. A factory girl. A domestic worker. Someone's mistress. They wrote about the brutality of the crime, the mystery of her identity, the monster who could do something like this on Christmas night. By February, the stories started getting smaller. Moved from the front page to page 3, then page 5. By March, they'd stopped running altogether. The case went cold. I kept working on the docks. Kept walking past lamp black swamp on my routes. Every time I went by, I thought about her. Wondered if she'd walked that path before, if she knew her killer, if she'd been scared. I thought about her feet sticking up out of the water, how that was the first thing I saw, how undignified it was, how wrong. The police never found out who she was, never made an arrest. The file stayed open for years, but no new leads came in. Eventually, it just became one of those old unsolved cases that people forgot about, but I didn't forget. I moved away from Harrison in 1912, got married, had kids, found work in Philadelphia, built a whole life far away from that swamp. But I thought about her regularly, wondered if anyone ever mourned her, if anyone lit a candle on the anniversary of her death, if anyone remembered her at all besides me. My wife asked me once why I was so fixated on it. We were sitting at dinner and I'd gone quiet, thinking about something, probably the case. She said, "You didn't know her. It was just bad luck you found her. Why does it bother you so much?" I didn't have a good answer then. But I've thought about it over the years. I think it's because she died alone. Whoever she was, wherever she came from, she died in that freezing water with no one to help her. And then she lay there all night, feet sticking up out of the swamp, until some teenager found her by accident while looking for ice to skate on. There was something so desperately sad about that, the randomness of it, the indignity, and then to never even be identified. To be buried in an unmarked grave with no name, no one standing over it saying, "Here lies so-and-so, who was loved, who mattered, who was more than just a victim." The newspapers sensationalized it because it was Christmas. made it more shocking, more tragic. Christmas swamp murder. But I think about the fact that someone spent Christmas Day knowing they'd killed her. Went home, maybe had dinner with family, opened presents, lived their normal life while her body floated in the swamp. I wonder if they went back to check, to see if anyone had found her yet, or if they just walked away and never looked back. I'm an old man now, 87. Most of the people who remember that case are dead. The newspapers from 1907 are archived somewhere, yellowed and fragile. The swamp isn't even there anymore. They filled it in decades ago, built warehouses over it. But I still remember. I remember the way the water had frozen in spots, little patches of ice forming around the edges. I remember the smell mud and chemicals and something else, something I didn't have a name for then but now know was death. I remember how her feet looked, pale and still, how wrong they seemed, pointing up at the sky like that. The police file is probably still somewhere, in a basement, in a box, gathering dust, case number whatever. Unidentified female, approximate age 20 to 30. Cause of death, drowning. Manner of death, homicide. Those dry official words that don't capture any of it. The violence, the fear, the cold water closing over her head. I've told this story a few times over the years. People are always curious, want to know what it was like finding a body. If I was scared, if I had nightmares, I wasn't scared, not in the moment. And I didn't have nightmares, not the way people mean it. But I think about her all the time. I've thought about her for 73 years. Sometimes I wonder what she was doing on Christmas night, if she was walking home from somewhere, if someone offered her a ride, if she knew she was in danger. Sometimes I wonder if she had family somewhere, parents who spent the rest of their lives wondering what happened to their daughter, siblings who remembered her at holidays, her absence like a wound that never healed. Sometimes I wonder if the killer is dead now too, if they lived a long life and died peacefully in their sleep, never punished, never even suspected. That bothers me more than I can say. The idea that they got away with it, that she's been gone for over 70 years and no one ever paid for what they did to her. But mostly, I just think about those few seconds when the cold water woke her up, when she realized where she was, what was happening. I think about how scared she must have been, how alone. I hope it was quick. I hope she didn't suffer long. But the medical examiner said drowning takes time, that you're conscious for most of it, that your body fights even when your mind is given up. I think about that on Christmas. Every Christmas since 1907, I think about a woman whose name I'll never know, drowning in a swamp while families celebrated nearby, while church bells rang, while children played with new toys. The world just kept going. It always does. I'm the last person alive who remembers finding her. When I die, even that will be gone. She'll be completely forgotten. Just a cold case file in a basement somewhere, a few newspaper articles in an archive, a footnote in Harrison's history. But she was real. She lived. She had a life before that night, before that swamp. She had thoughts and dreams and people she loved. She was more than just a body in the water. I found her on December 26, 1907, the day after Christmas. I was 17 years old, looking for ice to skate on. And 73 years later, I still see her feet sticking up out of the dark water. Still wonder who she was. Still hope that somewhere, somehow, someone remembers her name. I was working at the post office in Bristol when it started, January 1909. I'd been a clerk there for 3 years, sorting mail, handling parcels, the usual routine. Nothing exciting, but steady work. I liked the predictability of it. January 16th was a Saturday. Cold morning, clear sky. I got to work around 7 and started sorting the overnight mail. Normal day. Or it should have been. Around 9 o'clock, Councilman Whedon from Trenton came in. I knew him vaguely. He'd been in a few times before. But this time, he looked shaken. His hands were trembling when he set his package on the counter. "Did you hear?" he asked. I said I hadn't heard anything. Something was outside my window last night, flying. I heard wings, big wings, flapping against the glass. I must have looked skeptical because he kept talking, faster now. I went outside this morning. There were tracks in the snow, footprints, but not from any animal I've ever seen. Cloven hooves, like a goat, but the stride was too long. And there were marks from wings. Something had landed in my yard. I didn't know what to say. Told him maybe it was a large bird, a heron or something. He shook his head. This was no bird. He left. I went back to sorting mail, forgot about it by lunchtime. But that afternoon, more people came in with stories. A woman from Haddon Heights said something had attacked the trolley car she was riding, scratched at the windows, terrified the passengers. A man from Camden said he'd seen it near the river, something flying bigger than any bird with a long tail and a horse-like head. By Monday, the whole town was talking about it. I heard the stories in pieces from different people. The creature had been seen all over the region. Burlington, Trenton, Gloucester City, Camden, dozens of sightings, maybe hundreds, and they all described the same thing: a horse's head, bat wings massive 12 feet across, a long forked tail, cloven hooves, and a scream. People kept mentioning the scream, high-pitched, piercing like nothing they'd ever heard. The newspapers picked it up immediately. The Jersey Devil, they called it, some old Pine Barrens legend that most people had dismissed as folklore. But now everyone was seeing it. On Tuesday morning, the postmaster, Mr. Minster, came in looking pale. He'd been out early checking the mail routes and found tracks in the snow near the office. He took me and 2 other clerks outside to see them. I don't know how to describe those tracks. They weren't quite hoof prints. The shape was wrong, too elongated, and the pattern didn't match any animal I'd ever seen. They started near the fence, crossed the yard, went up and over the roof of the post office, and continued on the other side. What could make tracks on a roof? One of the clerks asked. No one answered. Mr. Minster reported it to the police. They came and photographed the tracks, but I don't think they knew what to make of them either. The whole thing was too strange. That week, people stopped going out at night. Businesses closed early. I walked home from work in groups. No one wanted to be alone after dark. The stories kept coming. The creature had been spotted on rooftops, in alleys, flying over the Delaware River. It had attacked a dog in Gloucester City, killed it, then flown away. The police in Camden and Bristol organized search parties. Men with rifles, walking the streets in groups, looking for it. On Wednesday night, I heard gunshots, multiple rounds fired somewhere toward the river. I stayed inside, doors locked, curtains drawn. The next morning, I heard what had happened. Police had seen it, actually saw it. Perched on a building downtown, they'd fired at it multiple times. The bullets seemed to pass right through. The creature had turned, looked at them, then flown away into the darkness. That detail, that the bullets didn't affect it, that's when the fear really set in. If you couldn't shoot it, how did you stop it? Schools closed. Factories sent workers home early. The Philadelphia Zoo supposedly offered a $10,000 reward for its capture, though I never confirmed if that was true or just rumor. Everyone was talking, speculating, telling stories they'd heard from someone else. I tried to stay rational about it. I'm not a superstitious person. I don't believe in monsters or devils, but I couldn't explain the tracks. I couldn't explain why hundreds of people across multiple towns were seeing the same thing. And I couldn't explain what I saw on Thursday night. I was walking home from work around 6 o'clock. Still light out, but the sun was setting. I took my usual route down Market Street, then cut through an alley that came out near my boarding house. Halfway through the alley, I heard it. The scream. That high-pitched, inhuman scream everyone had been describing. It came from above. I looked up. Something was perched on the roof of the building to my right, silhouetted against the darkening sky. I couldn't see details, just the shape, the wings folded against its body, the long neck, the tail curling down past the edge of the roof. We stared at each other. I don't know for how long, seconds maybe. It felt longer. Then it opened its wings, massive. They seemed to fill the narrow space between the buildings. It screamed again, that piercing, awful sound, and launched itself into the air. I ran. Didn't think about it, just ran. Made it to my boarding house, slammed the door, locked it. My landlady asked what was wrong. I couldn't speak. Just stood there trying to catch my breath. I didn't tell anyone what I'd seen, not right away. What was I going to say? That I'd seen the Jersey Devil? That it was real? People would think I was hysterical, caught up in the panic. But I knew what I'd seen. The sightings continued through the week. A family in Gloucester City, the Evanses, reported it had come to their house. They'd watched it through the window. Mrs. Evans described it in detail to the newspapers. Said it walked on its hind legs, had short front legs with paws that it held up, unused. She'd opened the window and shouted, "Shoo!" at it. The creature had turned, looked at her, barked like a dog, and flown away. That story should have been funny. Someone shooing away a monster like it was a stray cat. But no one laughed. We were all too frightened. On Friday, the panic reached its peak. Businesses throughout the region shut down completely. People stayed home. Armed groups patrolled the streets. Churches held special prayer services. The newspapers ran multiple stories every day, each one more sensational than the last. And then, on Sunday, January 24th, it stopped. No more sightings. No more tracks. No more screams in the night. The creature, whatever it was, disappeared as suddenly as it had appeared. At first, people were cautious. Thought maybe it was hiding, waiting. But days passed, then a week, then 2 weeks, nothing. Life went back to normal. Businesses reopened, schools resumed. The newspapers moved on to other stories. Within a month, people were already starting to dismiss it. Mass hysteria, they said, collective delusion. Someone had probably faked the first sighting and everyone else had convinced themselves they'd seen it too. But I couldn't dismiss it. I'd seen the tracks. I'd seen the creature itself, perched on that roof, wings spread against the sky. And I knew I wasn't the only one. Hundreds of people had seen it. Policemen, postmasters, factory workers, families in their homes. We couldn't all have been imagining it. I kept working at the post office, kept my head down, didn't talk about it much, but I thought about it constantly. What had it been? Where had it come from? Why had it appeared for just 1 week and then vanished? Some people said it was a prehistoric creature, somehow surviving in the Pine Barrens. Others said it was demonic, something summoned or released. A few people claimed it was a hoax, that someone had created a costume or trained an unusual animal. But none of those explanations fit. The tracks were real. The sightings were too consistent. And bullets had passed through it. I moved away from Bristol in 1912, got married, started a family in Pennsylvania, but I never forgot that week in January 1909. The week when something impossible became real, even if only briefly. I followed the newspapers over the years, looking for similar stories. There were occasional sightings. Someone would claim to see the Jersey Devil in the Pine Barrens or flying over a town at night, but nothing like that week. Nothing with the scale, the sheer number of witnesses. My children asked me about it when they got older. They'd heard the stories, the legend. I told them what I'd seen, described the creature on the roof, the wings, the scream. They listened politely, but I could tell they didn't quite believe me. Thought maybe I'd gotten caught up in the hysteria, convinced myself I'd seen something I hadn't. But I know what I saw. I'm 73 now. Most of the people who were there that week are dead. The ones still alive are old, like me, and our memories are suspect. People think we're exaggerating, or confused, or simply mistaken. The photographs of the tracks still exist, archived somewhere. The newspaper accounts are preserved. The police reports from that week are part of the record. But without the context, without the fear that gripped the region, they're just curiosities. Strange stories from a more superstitious time. I look at my grandchildren now, growing up in a world of automobiles and electricity and rational explanations, and I wonder what they'd think if something like that happened again. If something impossible appeared and couldn't be explained away. Would they believe their own eyes? Or would they find a way to rationalize it, to make it fit into the world they understand? I think about that week often, the way the entire region held its breath, the way normal life simply stopped because something had appeared that shouldn't exist. And I think about the creature itself, where it came from, where it went, why it showed itself for just 1 week and then disappeared back into whatever darkness had hidden it. I don't have answers. No one does. The case, if you can call it that, was never solved. The Jersey Devil remains a legend, a story people tell to scare each other. Most people don't believe it was ever real. But on Thursday, January 21st, 1909, I stood in an alley in Bristol and watched something impossible perch on a rooftop. I looked into its eyes. I heard it scream. And I knew, with absolute certainty, that I was seeing something that should not exist. The memory hasn't faded. If anything, it's gotten sharper over the years. I can still see the shape of it against the darkening sky, the way its wings unfolded, the way it looked at me before it flew away. I'll die soon. My health isn't good, and I'm old. When I'm gone, there will be fewer people left who remember that week. Eventually, there will be no one. Just old newspaper clippings and archived photographs of tracks in the snow. But it happened. Hundreds of us saw it. We weren't crazy. We weren't delusional. For 1 week in January 1909, something came out of the Pine Barrens and showed itself to the world. Then it went back, and somewhere out there, in those vast dark forests, I believe it's still waiting. I don't know if it will ever come back. Maybe that week was a fluke, an accident, a moment when the barriers between our world and whatever world it inhabits grew thin. Or maybe it's just patient. Maybe it's waiting for the right time, the right circumstances. Another cold January when the world is sleeping and no one expects to see something impossible outside their window. I hope I'm wrong. I hope it was a one-time event, never to be repeated. But I remember the way it looked at me, the intelligence in its eyes, the deliberateness of its movements. It knew exactly what it was doing. And I don't think it was finished. I worked the overnight shift at Memorial Field Park in Dumont, maintenance mostly. Emptying trash cans, checking the bathrooms, making sure no one was sleeping rough in the pavilions. Quiet work. The kind where you're alone with your thoughts for 8 hours. December 29th, 1977 was a Thursday. Cold night, but not freezing. I got to the park around 11 p.m. like always, did my usual rounds. Everything looked normal. The trash cans near the basketball courts were my last stop before taking my break. I remember checking my watch. It was just after 1 a.m. I pulled the bag out of the can, tied it off, was about to toss it in my cart when I noticed it felt heavier than usual. I almost didn't look inside, almost just threw it away and moved on, but something about the weight felt off, wrong. I untied the bag and looked inside. There was another bag, black plastic, tied tight. And inside that, I could see something wrapped in paper. Christmas wrapping paper, red and green with little Santas on it. I stood there for a long moment, just staring at it. It was 4 days after Christmas. People threw away wrapping paper all the time. But something about finding it here, in the park, in the middle of the night, made me uneasy. I pulled the package out. It was a box, maybe a foot square, the kind you'd use for a shirt or a sweater. The paper was slightly damp, starting to come apart at the corners. I should have called someone right then, should have left it alone and radioed for backup, but I didn't. I tore the paper off. Inside was a regular cardboard box, brown, unmarked. I opened it. I don't remember making a sound, don't remember dropping it or stepping back. But I must have, because the next thing I knew, I was 10 feet away, leaning against a tree, trying not to vomit. Inside the box was a human torso and a hand. I ran to my truck and radioed for police. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the receiver. The dispatcher asked me to repeat myself twice before she understood what I was saying. The police arrived within 15 minutes. 3 cars, lights off, quiet. They secured the area and called for more units. By 2 a.m., there were a dozen officers and 2 detectives standing around that trash can. They photographed everything. The trash bag, the Christmas wrapping paper, the box. Then they carefully removed the contents. A torso, cut cleanly at the waist and shoulders. The skin was pale, slightly blue, Female, they said, young, and one hand severed at the wrist. They searched the entire park, found more. Legs wrapped separately, also in Christmas paper, hidden in another trash can near the playground. They were packaged like gifts, like someone had been shopping for the holidays and decided to wrap their purchases before disposing of them. I sat in my truck while they worked. One of the younger officers brought me coffee, asked if I was okay. I nodded but didn't speak. What was there to say? By dawn, they'd collected everything except the head and one hand. Those were missing. The detectives asked me questions. When had I last checked that trash can? Had I seen anyone in the park earlier in the evening? Did I notice any vehicles that didn't belong? I told them I'd done my rounds at 11. The trash can had been empty then. I was certain, which meant someone had come into the park between 11 p.m. and 1 a.m. and left the packages while I was somewhere else on the grounds. The thought made my skin crawl. I'd been here, walking around, checking pavilions, clearing benches, and someone had been here too, carrying boxes wrapped in Christmas paper, placing them carefully in trash cans like they were just throwing away holiday decorations. They identified her within 2 days. Gaylor Alexander. Everyone called her Gail. She was 17 years old, lived in New York City, had been missing since mid-December. The newspapers picked up the story immediately. Dismembered teen found in Christmas packages. Body parts wrapped as holiday gifts. The coverage was sensational, graphic. They published details that made me sick to read. The medical examiner's report came out a week later. I shouldn't have read it, but I did. I needed to know, needed to understand what I'd found. She'd been dismembered with surgical precision. Clean cuts, probably with a saw. The body showed signs of careful handling. No tearing, no jagged edges. Whoever did it had taken their time. The genitals had been completely removed, excised, the report said. Never recovered. That detail stuck with me. The deliberateness of it, the specific violence, and the Christmas paper. That's what I kept coming back to. Someone had wrapped her body parts in festive paper covered with Santas and reindeer, had tied neat bows, had treated her remains like presents. The investigation went on for months. The head and other hand were found in January, almost 3 weeks after I'd discovered the torso. They'd been placed in subway lockers in New York, locked and left there, keys discarded. The police looked at everyone, boyfriends, family members, acquaintances. They investigated her life in detail, looking for anyone who might have wanted to hurt her, but nothing connected. No clear suspects, no obvious motive. I kept working at the park, didn't know what else to do. But it changed. Every trash can I opened, I hesitated. Every bag felt potentially dangerous. I started wearing gloves all the time, even though I'd never bothered before. The other maintenance workers tried to be supportive, told me it wasn't my fault, said I'd just been doing my job. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I should have known, should have seen something. The person who left those packages had been in the park while I was there. We'd shared the same space, breathed the same air. I thought about that constantly. Where had I been at midnight, at 12:30? Had I walked past them? Had they hidden, watched me pass, waited for me to move to another section of the park before placing their carefully wrapped packages in the trash cans? The Christmas paper bothered me most. It wasn't random, it was a choice. Someone had decided to wrap a teenage girl's dismembered body in holiday paper, had possibly saved the paper from their own Christmas celebrations 4 days earlier, had sat somewhere, their home maybe, and wrapped human remains the way you'd wrap a sweater or a book. I tried to imagine that scene, someone's living room or kitchen or basement, the body parts laid out, the wrapping paper unrolled, scissors cutting the paper to size, tape securing the edges, bows placed on top, the normalcy of it. The domestic ritual turned into something monstrous. My wife asked me to quit. She was worried about me, said I wasn't sleeping, wasn't eating properly. She was right, but I couldn't leave. Part of me felt like I owed it to Gail to stay, like if I quit, I'd be abandoning her somehow. The case went cold by summer. No new leads, no arrests. The newspapers stopped writing about it. People moved on, but I couldn't. I started researching the case on my own. Went to the library, read through newspaper archives, tried to find patterns, connections, anything the police might have missed. But I wasn't a detective. I didn't know what I was looking for. I thought about the missing genitals. The report had noted they'd been surgically removed. That suggested someone with medical knowledge, or at least someone who knew what they were doing. But the police had checked hospitals, medical schools, anyone with surgical training in the area. Nothing. I thought about the subway lockers in New York. Why there? Why not dispose of the head and hand the same way as the rest? Was it a taunt? A message? Or just practical? Maybe the person lived in New York and it was easier to leave them there. I thought about the timing, mid-December when she disappeared, December 29th when I found her. What had happened in those 2 weeks? Where had her body been? The medical examiner said she'd been dead for at least a week when I found her, possibly longer. Every question led to more questions, no answers. I kept working at the park for another 3 years. Eventually, I did quit, but not because of what I'd found. My wife got a job in Pennsylvania and we moved. Fresh start. New town, where no one knew me as the guy who found the body in the Christmas packages. But I never stopped thinking about it. Gail Alexander, 17 years old, someone's daughter, someone's friend, reduced to body parts wrapped in festive paper and discarded in a park. The case is still open, technically. Unsolved homicide, but I know how these things work. After 40 years, no one's actively investigating. The detectives who worked it are retired or dead. The evidence is in storage somewhere, filed away, gathering dust. I'm 68 now, retired. I live in a small town in Pennsylvania, far from Dumont, far from Memorial Field Park. But I still think about that night, about the weight of the trash bag, about opening the box and seeing what was inside. I think about the person who did it. Where are they now? Are they dead? In prison for something else? Or are they still out there, living a normal life, shopping for groceries, celebrating holidays, wrapping presents in Christmas paper? That last thought is the worst one. The idea that someone could do something like that and just continue on. Go to work, come home, watch television, sleep peacefully, carry that secret inside them and never tell anyone. I've wondered if they think about it, if they remember Gail, if they ever feel guilty or afraid or even just curious about whether they'll be caught. Or maybe they've forgotten. Maybe it meant so little to them that it doesn't even register anymore. Just something they did once, years ago, before moving on to other things. I don't know which possibility is worse. My wife knows I still think about it. Deguan. She doesn't ask me about it anymore. Learned years ago that talking about it doesn't help. But sometimes she'll catch me staring out the window, lost in thought, and I know she knows where my mind has gone. Back to that park, that trash can, that box wrapped in Christmas paper. I saved one of the newspaper articles from January 1978. Just one. It's in a folder in my desk drawer. I take it out sometimes and read it. The headline, "Dismembered Teen Identified." Below that, a school photo of Gail. She's smiling, looks happy, young. I stare at that photo and try to imagine her life, what she liked to do, what she wanted to be, who loved her, who misses her. And I think about the fact that someone looked at her, this 17-year-old girl with her whole life ahead of her, and decided to take it away. Decided to dismember her body and wrap the pieces in Christmas paper like they were gifts. The obscenity of it, the cruelty. I've lived with that image for 40 years. The box, the wrapping paper, the torso and hand inside. It's changed me in ways I'm still discovering, made me more cautious, more aware of what people are capable of, more conscious of the thin line between normalcy and horror. Because that's what haunts me most. Not the body itself, though God knows that was terrible enough, but the Christmas paper. The way someone had taken the time to wrap those packages carefully, to make them look festive, normal, The way they'd transformed something violent and grotesque into something that looked, from the outside, like a gift. I wonder if that was intentional. If it was part of the message. Here's your present. Your gift. Aren't you grateful? Or maybe it wasn't a message at all. Maybe it was just practical. Maybe they had wrapping paper left over from Christmas and used it because it was there. I don't know which explanation is more disturbing. I'll die without knowing what happened to Gail Alexander. Without knowing who killed her or why. Without knowing if they were ever punished or if they got away with it completely. The case will die with me and everyone else who remembers it. Eventually, it'll just be a file number in a storage room, a cold case with no family members left to push for answers, a forgotten tragedy. But I remember opening that box on December 29th, 1977, and seeing what someone had wrapped in Christmas paper. I remember Gail Alexander, and I hope wherever she is, she knows that someone still does. 5 real cases, all documented, most still unsolved. Subscribe right now if you want more true horror stories like these. Drop a comment with which case disturbed you most. I read every single one. These things actually happened in New Jersey, and some of the people responsible are still out there. Thanks for watching.